I am Prime Minister. My name is Utako. POIs out loud, please. My speech will start in three, two, one. Athletes are paid exorbitant salaries, far more than they deserve. The existing disparities in the sporting field must be abolished for sporting and for sporting for athletes, sorry. Okay. Two things in this debate. First on framing, and then second on my two arguments. My third argument will be touched on by my second speaker. Frame. Number one, what is the most likely implementation of this fixed equal salary in our world? We have four pieces of model here, which we think are reasonable and opposition side will likely agree to. Number one, a league-wide salary amount that every player in the league conforms to. This would likely be different depending on the leagues, i.e. a rookie league will get less pay than a higher one. Number two, a fair amount of money, probably somewhere around twice the average wage of the population, although different depending on the country. However, I don't think that this will be in the millions, nor are we spending any more money than what happens on opposition. I'd like to furthermore note that we'd likely spend far less money than opposition, since the top players in most leagues get paid by hundreds of times more than the newer players. We'll explain how this extra money is likely to be spent in our argumentation. Number three, we'd obviously regulate the other methods by which payment is done as well, which teams may create as loopholes to this policy. This means offering a percentage cut of the team, other non-monetary compensations, all of that is still part of a salary and will be cracked down upon. Number four, and finally, the methodology for regulation of these salaries will probably be contracts having to be submitted by both parties, agreed upon and approved by the league's board. Number two, what does opposition have to defend and prove in this argument? Op has to prove to us that the current model on payment behind closed doors with specific players getting a lot more pay than others. Their burden is to prove that our policy is harmful, but furthermore that it is more harmful than the opposition status quo. Number three, what are we willing to concede in this debate and why? We're willing to concede that some top players may backlash and quit the league or move. This likely is not that harmful, as leagues generally will just output new top players. Being good is a comparative metric, not an objective one. Much like how even youth leagues have good players, we think any league will continue to be able to output this money. Now on to my first argument. My first argument is about resource allocation. My first layer is why we have more resources to use than op. We've already explained this into the framing. I think you already know. My second layer, where would these resources be allocated to? Number one, it would be relocated to safety infrastructures. This looks like example, investing in better medics, health services, and or insurance and medical facilities. A new injury protection plan, such as stretching and an enhanced nutrition plan. This allocation of resources is very important and effective as it quite literally enhances how well a player will do in their matches, as it affects things such as maintaining good condition of an athlete's body, providing enough nutrition to promote muscle growth and repair. A very clear illustration of what would happen without these resources is shown at the Paris Olympics this year. There was a lack of nutritional food, scarcity in carbohydrates, meat, fresh food, as well as it tasting really unpleasant, as well as awful facilities such as cardboard bunk beds, mediocre training rooms, as well as the lack of gyms, which weakened athletes and made them sick, unable to do as well as they trained for. Second point on layer two is youth development. Investing in B-League teams so that they can eventually join your team will exist on our side of the bench, which I don't think exists on opposition. Layer three, what is the comparative of these two worlds? What opposition side looks like is hyperfixation on attracting talent with financial resources. This means that leagues invest and push all their money on gaining newer and better talent rather on their existing players. Second argument, the league becomes more successful. My first mechanism on this is that the implementation of this motion leads to a more competitive league. Let's look at our world first. There would be more transfer, more underdog stories, and more close fights. Since there is no difference in the salary, good athletes have less of an incentive to to gather to an extremely rich team, which levels the playing field. Let's compare that to Opposition's world. What primarily exists in Ops world is the monopolization of power. Take a look at Shohei Ohtani, for example. He signed a 6-year contract, no thank you, worth $155 million with the Angels, but recently switched to a $700 million contract with the Dodgers. This clearly shows you, in the status quo, the more money these teams have, the better athletes they can sign with. What does this mean? It means that it's inevitable that there would be an overwhelming giant number one that exists in Ops paradigm. Our side promotes a more entertaining, fair world where players and leagues are more incentivized to play and train better. My second mechanism is on stability. 2 reasons. Number one, leagues are better able to predictably budget. Since the amount of money spent is the same, i.e. the yearly salary is the same, money invested in infrastructure is the same, no. Leagues can predict financial situations. The implication of this is that there will be more investor confidence. It's easier to invest into leagues as predictability and stability is very attractive to such investors. Why is this investment good? Number one, it provides players with a nurturing environment so that they can focus on perfecting their sporting abilities, which will higher the chances of them winning a league or placing higher than they did compared to the previous year. Number two, it gives back to investors. What this looks like is by investors investing their money, they are giving money to achieve the goal of winning. Overall, better results from players so that they can get more benefits than what they invested in. For this to happen, it leads to creating an environment for players to reach their highest potential. Second reason, there would be long-term and or larger spending. No. This looks like A, investing in a higher, more efficient technology, B, investing in newer, bigger stadiums, and C, investing in B-League youth teams. Meaning leagues can spend their money in a bigger way because they know their budget and can predict how to use it. The comparative of this. Ops world, you need a lot of money in stock to sign talent quickly when they get into the market. If Messi gets released, you have to have millions and millions of dollars in order to quickly sign him. So therefore, in Opposition world, it's unpredictable. Budgeting and predictability does not exist. The impact of this, it's very simple. There's going to be more interest and more investment. Therefore, for the sake of these leagues, so proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank Prime Minister for the fine speech. Leader of opposition, whenever you're ready, you may take the floor. Here.
Can I just check that I'm both audible and visible?
Yes, sir.
All right, just give me a second. Okay, time will start on my first word. What proposition is standing for is essentially communism in football. The reason why this fails is because hard work is punished, yet complacency and laziness is rewarded. A few things I'll be doing in my speech today. Number one, on framing, and then number two, a few rebuttals to propositions, arguments, and lastly, on arguments as to why on the free market principle, and also as to why we're actually able to benefit these players better. So number one, on framing, what proposition's model actually looks like, what their role looks like, the proposition needs to take this trade-off, right? The simple fact is that in sports, your value is entirely dependent on your skill level, which means that the wage that you're paid or the value is entirely based on your talent, right? We're going to explain this later in our first argument. And number two, for small leagues, we tell you that either you have to pay all the players a high wage, higher than you can actually afford to pay to incentivize your players to stay in your league and not leave for another better paying league. This means that in order for you to actually be able to afford to pay this wage for your players, we're telling you that these small leagues will need to take away money from things such as training, resources, paying for your players like physical therapy, etc., right? We tell you that in the end, this is only going to backfire on these small leagues as essentially they only have worse training. We tell you this is a big problem. Explain later, right? Number two, the second option is that you pay your players the wage that you can actually afford, which means that the wage is going to be low, right? Which then results in your players leaving to another league that can actually pay them a higher wage. So why is this a problem now that now that these small leagues are essentially losing players, right? Either not being able to afford the all the resources, or actually not being or like essentially losing players to bigger leagues, right? We're telling you that smaller leagues are actually able to allow like more amateurs or like average people enter leagues in the first place, because this looks like a lower entrance level, right? So then you're taking in people who aren't exactly the level of Ronaldo, but it's okay because they still will be seen in your small league, which essentially means that when these smaller leagues are out of business, you essentially just have like less and less people joining actually into this sport. Right, take later. The comparative over here is that in the status quo, these smaller leagues are paying their best players far more than they're worth because they want to keep them. So when everything's equal, there is actually no incentive for the best players in these leagues to even stay, for these small leagues to actually build themselves up. So 2 layers on what then happens. Number one, these smaller leagues will lose their best players, right? We tell you that less people will watch, and so essentially there's a cycle where you have this less income, you're unable to pay your players, and essentially in the end, you're only going to go out of business. And the second layer is that they will then have to take in even worse players because they have less income, which is essentially resulting in this worse sport overall. So the issue with having exponentially more leagues, more big leagues and small leagues, is that number one, the impact that we already said, that small leagues cater towards smaller players, so we're actually able to take in more amateurs and more people who actually want to join the industry. And number two, on the how smaller leagues are far more local than the bigger ones, because the bigger ones have these huge games in the top of the line cities around the world, right? While small leagues are actually able to cater towards these their local communities. I'll take your point now.
As our framing specifically notes, we are willing to trade this off because being good is comparative. If you are the best in the league, even if the good players leave, you are still the best in the league. I don't understand why, therefore, it is important that objectively good players stay in small leagues.
Okay, we're telling you that there is no incentive to get better when you're getting paid the same as everyone else, okay? Moving on to rebuttals. First of all, they can see that the top players may quit, but they say that it's not a big problem. But the entire reason why leagues have good players is because they have the incentive to earn money, right? If the cap stays the same, there essentially is no money investing for them to create better players. So this, again, essentially goes against this principle. Number two, they talk about how the money is going to resources. We tell you that this money going into the companies are likely not going to be used for the resources because people buying the money are the sports players themselves, right? And so if no one even wants to play the sport, then essentially there is no resource in the first place. Number three, they talk about how the league becomes more successful because you have more competition. We tell you that companies have less money because there's a decline in the quality of play and talent in the league, which essentially leads to this reduced fan engagement. You have lower ticket sales, media right feeds, and other revenue streams. So a league essentially runs on these ticket sales, media rights, revenue streams, etc. Right? So we tell you that there is no way these leagues will have the same level of revenue from these sources. So you have less fan engagement, which essentially means less success on the league, which literally runs on fan engagement. We tell you that they actually do not provide proper mechanization on this. So on the argument on monopolization, we tell you that with more money, you'll get better players, right? The giant number one, and why this matters, is that they have not proved why this is actually wrong, because the players play within the league. It's usually not dependent on the largest sum of money, but how these people budget. And so those in Premier Leagues have all the money and the ability to sign. So this usually does not occur because players start small and they grow big, right? For example, Messi, he grew up in Barcelona, which originally did not have the money. The club grows when their own player grows. How these companies actually get money, which is essentially how these companies actually get money in the first place. So moving on to our argument number one on the free market principle and how people are good deserve to be more rewarded and how people are worse are less rewarded. Number one, supply and demand. You have demand for better players, which means you have a higher supply on salary, right? It's unfair for someone who is good to be played the same as someone who is bad, because as set up in framing sports, it's all about your talent and how good you play. So the same applies to that players who are being played who are being paid the same as someone who's famously known for being a very good player, right? Because players deserve this money that they're worth, because the intrinsic value of sport, that it's fair. You are paid if you have better skills, if you train harder. No, in order to get where they are in the first place, these players are most likely have to sacrifice a lot, right? So we tell you that's comparatively better than any other industry because there is no legacy or any way that you could be paid more other than your own personal talent. So why then is on prop this unfair? Proposition is unfair because they quite literally say, okay, CR7 should get paid the same amount as like Muskie, right? No, if you don't know who Muskie is, this further proves our point that inherently you should not be paid more than CR7 because you don't know who this is. So this is simply unfair because take the example of a manager and a worker. When you're a good worker, someone who's putting in a lot of effort, then you have a higher chance of becoming a manager and getting better pay. So why is this? This is because like as a manager, you're doing more work, right? You're playing a large role in the company. So this is proportional to the sports entertainment industry because if you work harder, then you should be able to pay more because you're contributing, number one, more to the team, which means increased pay time. playtime. And number two, you're taking the losses for a team as well, as we proved to you later in our argument of injury insurance. And number two, why is this better for the players on our side? We tell you that if players work hard, then they must need the money because it's connected to their lifestyle, right? For play, the personal trade-off is that you need the money no matter how large it is. So on time, you spend time training, right? These players, the trade-off here is that now there's less time spent on your own personal life. So when you dedicate everything in your life to get to the point of your career, you train like, I don't know, like 14 hours a day, you deserve to have the millions of dollars that you have, right? Number two, we tell you on health with the injury insurance, different sports and even different positions within the same sport have vastly different injury risks. For example, the NFL, like line have much higher risk of serious injuries compared to the wide receivers. So proposition has failed to understand now that these professional sport leagues implement a fixed salary, they have no incentive to factor in the injury insurance within these sales. So what is the problem with this? We tell you that once something is fixed equal means that there is no accounting for the individual needs of each sports player. And number two, in the status quo, we see that players who get paid more inherently get more play time. So why is this? Because they have more of a chance of getting seriously injured and they bring more money in for the league. So you get more sponsorships, you're able to promote the league when you get paid more, right? So, but paid more by the league. So number three, if these people are getting paid the same amount as the people who barely have any play time, now cannot afford their injury insurance because as it's incredibly high, because you're getting paid the same as like these other people, right? Because they have this incredibly high risk of getting injured. Now the burden of taking care of themselves is on the players themselves, which should not be the case because where are they getting this money if they're getting paid so little because they're getting paid the same as everyone else, right? We tell you that if they are number one getting paid more, it's unsustainable for this league overall. Number two, getting paid is this so little. It's such an unfair burden placed on these players as essentially they're basically sacrificing themselves, right? And so this rebuts the point on how resources go back into the league. So this money depends on this inherent need of the players. So players are less incentivized to work as hard because the sports is based on the money, right? Better skills equals better money. So in the status quo, there is no incentive to work hard when you're getting paid the same as someone else who I don't know, doesn't put themselves out, doesn't get injured in these games, right? And so we think that this is about number one, worse sports. And number two, we just see this less incentive for the players to actually care about these leagues. We tell you these smaller companies are less likely to invest into players. And so please side with proposition.
I thank you, the proposition, for the fine speech. Deputy Prime Minister, now you're ready. You may take the floor. Hello.
Can I confirm I'm clearly audible as well as visible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Okay. The opposition claim is one that is tense with itself, because on one hand, they claim that all of these players are just going to leave this league and move to a different league that pays them more, and in the same breath, they claim that leagues lose competitiveness. But what in actuality happens is that these leagues that pay more, the ones that OP exactly claims that these players will move to, become the competitive leagues, which means competitiveness in specific leagues are still maintained. The fact that one league pays more than another means one league is therefore more competitive than another. Opposition makes the case for us. With that said, then, I'm going to deal with extraneous claims, then on small leagues, and in general league success, and then finally on resource allocation before extending arguments. On extraneous, insane claims OP makes, then, two things I want to note. First, on the idea of the incentive to work hard. Second, on the idea of injury. First, on the idea of incentive to work hard, I just don't think that this is how the majority of sports players function. The Olympics gives out very little prize money, and people still go and compete because they're competitive, because they want to win, and because they love the sport. So for the majority of players, I don't think that whether or not they get paid more than their other teammates and whether or not they get paid more than their opponents is not a reason for them wanting to compete hard or not. But secondly, even if this were to be untrue, as we've told you repeatedly, success and hard work and competitiveness is a comparative skill, and we'll explain a little bit more about this later, but this is a trade-off we're willing to take. Second, on the idea of injury, which Op brings up, two responses. Number one, we have more financial resources, which our first argument proves to do things like insure players if the team has to do that in a form that isn't salary. But secondly, our framing also deals with this, where we explain how much money we will give out in specific amounts and explain the process by which we will do that and to guarantee the safety of athletes. It is in the incentive for these sports teams to ensure that their players are safe. We believe that sports players in sports leagues will therefore do so. With that said then, on league success, I want to firstly deal with the opposition argumentation that tells you that small leagues are harmed for two reasons. One, because they're unable to pay for players and their salaries, and two, because their top level players leave. Three responses. Number one, I want to clarify our extremely price efficient model we give you from first, which opposition never engages to and never even acknowledges. The analysis here was to say that we are going to likely pay comparatively less than opposition, and insofar as we are doing so, we are not going to exceed the budget we have allocated, rather we are likely going to underestimate it. The implication being that we're not going to spend ridiculous amounts of money playing these players. We tell you we're not going to give them millions of dollars. We're going to give them enough to ensure their livelihoods, their safeties, and their happiness. The second response I want to give there, though, is to say that this argumentation on small leagues is also just completely untrue. It's unclear where these players are even leaving to. If you are unable to make it out of a small league, just because the small league doesn't pay you enough doesn't mean you have an alternative to escape to anyway. So I don't know what these players are going to do. They can't go to a different, better league. They're just not good enough to do so, and if they were, they would have done so anyway. Third, and finally, we're willing to take this trade-off. Small leagues can still lose players and survive, and I'll explain a little bit later on why money is more important than the competitiveness, or whether or not top players exist in the league. That's my responses to small leagues. But furthermore, I want to highlight the lack of engagement to our argumentation. We had two mechanisms here. The first on league competitiveness. Their response is to say it's less competitive. We prove this is untrue. My intro does that for you, where players are just going to move to different leagues. Maybe those leagues pay more, but then therefore that league becomes more competitive and that league can prosper. I think this is fairly intuitive to buy. Secondly, our second mechanism was on league stability. This was completely unengaged to. That budgeting and the predictability of the output that you have to do means more investors are likely to come and more long-term, large-scale investment is able, especially in top teams. There was zero engagement to this. This is especially important for two independent weighing mechanisms. Number one, on the success of the league, this is highly important. There's more events, more sporting, etc., and more investment into infrastructure. But also secondly, when top-level leagues get more investment and more support, lower-level leagues and less popular leagues also prosper for two reasons. One, their survivability is dependent on stable investment, which we support and they never respond to. But also secondly, top-level leagues often extend their infrastructure and investment development to the lower-level leagues, like how Formula One teams buy multiple smaller teams so they can fund their own team, or how Premier League teams have smaller subsidiary teams in the younger leagues. This means that smaller leagues are highly dependent upon larger leagues, and we prove investment to them. That's the clash on league success. But I also want to note our second clash on resource allocation is almost entirely unengaged to. That is, insofar as you take our framing and insofar as we've proven to you that we have substantially more money than opposition, we are better able to allocate these money to safety and youth development, while opposition is hyper-fixated on signing the next big talent. Finally then, before moving to my extending argument, I want to deal with the principle. The principle is to say that these individuals deserve this money. Two responses to this principle. Number one, this is not a principle. Skill never correlates to pay in any field, including sporting. Sporting has a lot of ulterior incentives by which pay is increased. For example, the fact that you have to outcompete a person, which means there is a race to the top. That's not skill, that's just logistics. Or on another and this is even true for my second response, that opposition is never able to fulfill this principle in their entirety, not only because sports players aren't paid this way, but also all of the sports players, managers, and healthcare professionals. These people are never paid as much as their skill is worth. They may go through medical school and they get paid less than athletes. Pay never correlates to skill, and this is just not a principle OP can base their claim upon. Two extending argumentations then. The first extending argumentation is on comparison that occurs internally. The first layer of this argument is the layer I just presented to you in response to the principle, that contracts and salaries is often quite arbitrary and based off of ulterior factors that the sports player is in no control over. With that said then, second layer, why is this so harmful? Two reasons. Number one, because there is internal competitiveness within the league and within sports teams, which lead to internal division and fighting, which overall harms sports teams. But also secondly, that internal self-player value decreases not because of their skill, but rather because of the amount of dollars they're allocated to, which means sports players grow more and more unconfident. We solve this because there is no point of comparison that individuals can have in regards to their pay. The second extension is on transparency, which leads to athlete protection. The opposition side is oftentimes predatory. There's often incredibly low, unlivable salaries. There are illegal transfers and unjust taking of advantage of young sports players. In the comparative, and oftentimes this is problematic because young players lack protections, right? Young players often don't have enough money to sign lawyers, and young players often have their moms as their managers. This means that predatory contracts highly exist in opposition. In the comparative in our world, two solvencies. Number one, on the level of salaries, we ultimately just solve this problem because we pay them an adequate living wage, which our framing already proves to. But also secondly, that the fact that this official organization has to give checks through all of these contracts, which was our fourth piece on framing, unresponded to from LO, means that there's a deterrence factor as well as an impossibility factor in you being able to pass predatory contracts through the league. The implication, therefore, is that athlete protection, especially in the younger leagues and especially for newer athletes, is highly better in our world because we have official methods of contract signing that do not coexist in opposition. The implication of my speech, therefore, is fairly simple. Not only do we win in regards to which is better for the league, but far more importantly, we protect vulnerable athletes that don't have transferable skills that allow them to shift to other industries. These athletes are the most important part of this debate and why we ought to take this debate. Proud to stand on top. Thank you.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister for the fine speech. Let me hear a proposition whenever you're ready. Take the floor.
Can I? Okay, can I get like a few seconds to organize my notes?
Sure.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, she, her pronouns, POIs verbally, I will not be checking the chat. With that, my speech will start in 3, 2. With all the holes and contradictions in Proposition's case, I think that it's clear that we take this debate already, right? So in my speech, I'll be going through some rebuttals and one extension on how like our side is better for the leagues, right? So first rebuttal, they talk about how like being good is comparative, right? But then when the top players quit and another player is the best in the league, the other players still have no incentive to get better because they're still not going to be good. And they're not going to be good enough to transfer to like the better leagues, therefore, right? And two, they have like they say that we have a contradiction, but we don't because it's in a different scenario, right? Because we say that the max level of competitiveness and skills that somebody can reach is capped. Because when you are the first, and if you're in the first league and as the top player, there is no reason to continue, right? And three, in terms of injury, they say that they have more financial resources, but they do not because less people are watching sports when it is less competitive because players have no incentive to go to the top when they are paid like the same as the people in like the top. So they're less likely to actually have the resources because when sport is no longer competitive, then you don't have the buy-in that you would get, right? And then we think that like the issue of this is that they do not actually like rebut this properly, which we've already proved in our first speech, right? And then four, on the incentive to work hard, right? Because they say that sport players don't get paid a lot, but we literally tell you that the examples that they bring up the Olympics, I don't think they get it because people in the Olympics, they get paid so much. Like people literally compete in the Olympics because of the monetary incentive, because you get like millions of dollars if you win a gold medal, for example, in Hong Kong, right? And for example, like CR7 literally chose Saudi Arabia because like Ronaldo chose Saudi Arabia because of this. Like he goes to these companies because of money, and the money wants him because of these skills, right? So and like I think the fifth rebuttal, how they underestimate this and go under like all the average salary, like putting the salary under the smaller league, like salary in the status quo means that players are unable to do this, right? And in the point of league stability, how you get more long-term investment, like is literally what happens on our side, because it's not exclusive to argue that these smaller leagues benefit from larger leagues, because we tell you that one, smaller leagues simply will not exist as properly functioning teams on proposition, which I will talk about later in my arguments. And then like the smaller leagues benefit from larger leagues can still happen on our side, right? Because I think
Right.
now articulate like the problem with proposition is that they never prove why like companies are going to like shoot themselves in the foot, right? Because if cutting costs is so bad, then they won't do it in the first place, right? Because like giant companies have the reason to if they pay like people $400 million, then they still have like they know that this is good for themselves, which is why they're doing it in the first place, right? So we think that if investing in resources is so good, then this would already happen on our side of the house, which is something that like proposition just completely does not get. And the last rebuttal on transparency, we think that like we tell you that your like proposition literally like at best has worse functioning smaller leagues, and then they agree to the fact that these larger companies have more money and more influence, so like they seem to think that it's like the transparency won't happen on their side as a wash, right? Because you're literally having extreme domination of larger leagues, because as we've already said before, people are going to go to these larger leagues because they have more resources to exploit like the so-called overworked and underpaid kids on their side, right? So then
Point.
and then we talk about how like people do not deserve it, right? We think that price does not correlate to work, right? Because like this is like the intrinsic nature of sport, how you're trying to outcompete other people, etc., right? And then like for example, and then, like soccer players are not like over doctors, right? Because they're literally in two separate industries. We think that doctors do get paid a lot of money, better than like more than nurses, because they're like they work more than nurses. They've worked their way up to the top, right? And then so before I move on to my extension, yes, I'll take that point.
Even if we were to take the absurd idea that athletes are only athletes for the money, there are still monetary incentives to get better, so you can get higher, so you can go to higher paying leagues in our world as well. This incentive to be competitive is symmetric, and therefore all leagues still
Like,
remain competitive.
we've already talked about this in like the free market like argument, right? And then so moving on to my extension on why this is worse for leagues, right? Because we think that smaller companies are like less likely to invest into players, because the smaller leagues and companies are now forced to pay more than they originally would. They have to divert resources away from training into the salaries, right? Because that is to say, sports training from the root does not improve because players are trained less, because the companies have to pay all like the players equal like salary. So then they're like, you're not able to have better training resources, etc. So when you cannot train as much, you realistically cannot pay the players the salary for that much longer before the company's in debt because of poor performances. Comparatively, when you have better training resources and facilities, you're able to win more. The company gets more money and media attention. You're able to pay all the players more, right? And so the second subpoint on talent drain, right? Because in the status quo, smaller leagues are able to pay and contain top players in their league because they want to keep them and they are popular. This is principally right because the players work their way up to the top. They inherently deserve what they are getting under the status quo, and it's also an incentive to work harder, right? Because that is to say, the top player in a smaller league is more likely to be paid more than if the top player was in a top league, because in a top league, they already have many other players that are better, right? So then what happens is that everybody tries to go to the higher leagues, and this is not repeated as proposition tries to run, because there's no incentive to become a better player because there is no more money. So they won't be good enough to like move up leagues, because even if they're like other alternatives as like they try to run, we don't think that this is like this is not going to be as effective, right? And then so when top players are then going to switch to bigger leagues because the leagues have a better reputation, the companies have better training facilities, etc. This is, and then like therefore like because the higher leagues have the higher average league price, so they just go to them, right? So then what are the impacts? We think that one, the smaller leagues are going to lose money, because when the smaller leagues get less popular because all the good players relocate, what happens is that the leagues will lose money because they aren't winning championships, since the best players are gone and they're left with players who don't have any incentive to get better, right? Because everybody is paid the same, and you don't have the power structure where you start at the bottom and you want to work your way up to the top, because you see that when you're at the top, you're able to get a higher salary, right? And then so B, the team quality gets worse because the team doesn't have enough money to train and travel, etc. And it's like an even worse cycle when they keep losing championships and the company slowly starts running out of money. And C, they therefore do not get any money from sponsorships, etc. And they don't get any positive media attention, which is just really detrimental to like the team overall, right? So then what happens then is that the team basically goes bankrupt, and like overall you're unfairly locking out smaller teams and smaller like companies because of this, because of the fact that like now they have no like the top players have no incentive to stay in the like stay in those leagues and just move to another league, right? And it's a wing, right? So then we think that on our side, top players are going to stay with the smaller leagues, etc., because of the monetary incentive that you have and the fact that you're able to win championships and still able to help the company with funding. So on our side, we uniquely have a cycle where you're able to win tournaments, you're able to get more media attention and better revenue for your for like the company and for the team. So then therefore you're able to like pay all the players more money. And even though it's not equal, we still say that you're still able to help the players, which you do not have on proposition side of the house. And two, we also have the better quality of sports through competition, because when you start from the bottom and you have the incentive to work your way up, you start competing more, you want to train harder. And we think that this is what like people like pay to watch. They pay like people literally pay to watch people like compete, and they want to, and they literally watch having like maybe like smaller teams vs like bigger teams, and like seeing how like this plays out in the end, which we uniquely have on our side. So what have I told you today, right? So I rebutted all their points, and I've talked about how the smaller league loses money and the impact of this, and how like you only get like positive benefits on our side of the house. Proud to oppose.
I thank DLO for the fine speech. Whenever you're ready, you may take the floor.
Sorry, I'm having technical issues. I might switch a device, so please wait for like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, pronouns he, him. I'm Ria from MAD. PLS out loud, please. But the decision whether to take it is mine, so please wait. My time starts in 3, 2, just one thing in this debate. First, I'll be introducing, like, just reconstructing our whole argument and rebutting to against opponent's case, right? Our first argument was resource allocation. The first layer, it was why we tell you there's more resources on our side of the world. Frame is at first is what is more likely to be the implementation of this fixed equally salary in our world. First, a league-wide salary amount that every player in the league conforms to. This will likely be different depending on the leagues, i.e. a rookie league will get less paid than a higher one. Second, a fair amount of money, probably somewhere around twice the average wage of the population, although different depending on the country. However, I don't think this will be millions, nor are we spending any more money than we happens in opposition. I'd like to furthermore note that we are likely to spend far less money than the opposition, since the top players in most leagues get paid hundreds of times more than new players. We'll explain how this extra money is likely to be sent in our argumentation. 3, we'd obviously regulate other methods by which payment is done as well, which teams may create as loopholes to this policy. This means offering a percentage out of the team and other non-monetary compensations. All of that, it is part of a salary, will be cracked down upon. Now, rebuttals. Opponents mentioned that we oppose government's framing of lower players' salaries equal because of the high paycheck they receive currently and fair compensation for the countless hour and energy risking their body, etc. This does not even prove of their principle, and this does not matter in this debate, right? Op in response to our first argument on resource allocation says that cooperations would do so anyway. The problem is cooperations don't, because A, cooperations on limited cash cows, they have budgets to maintain, right? B, cooperations get a better return in investment buying a new player than they get from getting a new stadium. We force them to change their incentives, right? Now, the second layer is in Gov's world where this money will be used for, right? A, to safety infrastructure, for example, better medics, massages, and better coaches for players, which is going to benefit them in the long term, right? And B, youth development and scouting. When this change is implemented, we will allocate more money towards safety infrastructure, medical care, and better coaching for athletes. This is not just about fairness, it's about ensuring that every player, regardless of their marketability or fame, has access to the best medical facilities, the best, safest playing environments, and the most qualified coaches. Imagine a league where every player feels secure, both on and off the field. A league where injuries are minimized and mental health is prioritized. A league that invests in the future of its athletes rather than exploiting them for short-term gain. This is what government side proposes. This is a drastic difference between opponents, right? Our third layer is opposition sides hyperfixation on tracking players' habits. In opponents' world, opponents are like misutilizing money, right? First off, let's just marvel at the sheer genius of opponents who pour all the money into the pocket of a handful of superstars while the rest of the players just left to fend of themselves picking up trash. Who needs safety infrastructure, top-notch medical cares, or quality coaching, right? I mean, why would we want to invest in the well-being of athletes when we can just watch them and risk their health for the sake of a few $1,000,000? Imagine the joy of pooling the cash into proper facilities, medical support, and coaching. Oh, but no, let's keep feeding the egos of while we struggle. What a fantastic plan. By the way, this is sarcasm, right? Rebuttal, we tell you that opponents tell you that there's less money. I flip this argument by telling you that the clashes of our first argument, the first layer tells you why we have more resources compared to your side of the world, right? First, we tell you there's going to be reduction in salary inflation. Fixed equal salaries will help stabilize player salaries, reducing the financial burden on teams. This could allow teams to allocate funds to other areas, which I've mentioned multiple times, that was completely unengaged by opponents, right? Second, we would attract new investors because a more predictable financial model with equal salaries will make teams more attractive to potential investors, leading to increased capital investments in the leagues, right? And thirdly, there's going to be enhanced competitive balance. With equal salaries, teams will be more evenly matched, leading to a more competitive game. It's going to attract more fans, increase viewership, and result in a higher ticket sale and merchandise revenue, right? Moving on to a second argument, successful leagues. Mechanism one was about competition. In our side of the world, there's going to be more competition, more transfer, and more underdog stories. That's more emotional for fans anyway. So that means there's no one superior, and everyone has a similar power. First and foremost, a fixed salary creates a level playing field. No longer will we see wealthy teams hoarding talent simply because they can't afford to pay exorbitant salaries. Instead, every team will have the same financial resources to build their rosters, allowing smaller market teams to compete on equal footing with the giants of the league. This parity will lead to more exciting matchups and unpredictable outcomes, keeping fans on the edge of the seats. Next, when salaries are equal, the focus shifts from financial gain to talent and skills. Players will be motivated to improve their performance, knowing that their success will not depend on their paycheck, but on the hard work and dedication. This merit-based system will elevate the quality of play across the board, and athletes strive to outshine their peers. Additionally, with financial disparities minimized, teams can attract a wider range of talent. Players from diverse backgrounds and lesser-known leagues will have the opportunity to showcase their skills, enriching the sport with a variety of playing styles and perspectives. This influx of talent will only heighten the competition and thrill the game. Let's not forget that increased competition benefits the fans as well, right? Which was forgotten by opponents. With more balanced teams, you can expect tighter races for championships, more nail-biting finishes, and an overall more engaging experience for spectators rather than just messy playing football, kicking every goal, and then the other players are just doing around nothing, right? Finally, when players are relieved from the pressure from salary negotiations, they can focus entirely on their performance, and this shift can lead to improved mental health and well-being, allowing athletes to give their best on the field without the burden of financial stress, right? However, compare it with opponents' world. Opponents will continually watch the same game over and over and over again. Please enjoy the same movie, right? Please enjoy, because who doesn't love watching the same teams win after year and year? With fixed equal salaries, we might actually have a shot at creating leagues where every team has fighting chance. Shocking, I know. A little competition would spice things up, wouldn't it? Instead of the usual predictable outcomes, we could have thrilling matches where outcome isn't dedicated, like who can throw the most money at the top talent, who can kick the most goals. But hey, why would we want that? Stability and excitement in our league sounds like a terrible idea. We tell you that there's going to be more monopolization where other team members are just lacking motivation. This is also sarcasm. Now moving on to rebuttals. Opponents say that there's going to be less incentive to work hard. I flip this argument by telling you that there was actually gain incentive to improve that they are played on the same amount. Opponents fail to address this by small professional players. These players feel inferior compared to top players. The difference in paycheck only makes it worse. By equalizing payment, it shows valuing these small pro players by saying that they are also valued as other team members and motivates them to prove to the public that they're worthy of this payment. Furthermore, it enhances unity within a team by showing that although there is a difference in skill, they're equally worthy. Now, one reason why this is untrue, if fans see a lazy or bad player, obviously there's going to be a backlash and hate. He and she will be fired from the team. Was this not intuitive to opponents? This is kind of laughable. Just realize that opponents' case was solely relying on this, on motivation, what we rebutted to in multiple times, and they keep pressing that. Opponents also mentioned that in the status quo, players have no incentive to stay if they get the same amount of money. This is just like ridiculous. Opponents keep on fixating this point. Our second speaker has already demolished this point by saying that these players most of the time do not have the alternative to go to. And let me clarify, sports players do not work at the same hard hours of training for play. This sport is very competitive industry with low chance of making it to professional. If these players really only cared about money, they would have gone into fitness or medic. However, these players deserve a nurturing sector, a secure, effective environment for them to fulfill their potential. This is the least that sports companies can provide. This is the only thing that is a true compensation for their long hours, dedication, blood, sweat, and tears, and dreams of becoming a better player. Opponents have also mentioned that when one player carries the baggage and shoots all the goals, why should a paycheck to be cut equally? Sports is all about talent, right? The thesis here is that strikers to shoot, the entire team must defend, tackle, and collaborate to get their balls to that player. To the general public, it appears for example, only Messi is a key player who's carrying on a team, which is understandable to the people who don't know a lot on football. The person who took the points look like the ace. This is true to some extent. However, note that the team's success relies on the entire team. Therefore, they are very likely to provide a good amount of baggage, meaning that it is unjust for only one player to be overly credited. Now, moving on to your argument 3, which is about internal comparison. Athletes compare themselves to others and feel bad about it, which will lead to a decline in mental health. This was not engaged by opponents at all, dropped all of their arguments immediately. They have completely forgotten it. And their last argument 4 was about transparency and athletes' protection. There are often predatory contracts that go on beyond closed door opposition. In our world, we are giving them a safe, livable salary, and officials have to look through each contract, which means that sport teams can take advantage of young, vulnerable players. This was also completely forgotten by opponents. Just with all these flaws, they still tell you that our speech was full of holes. At least our argument was not a Swiss cheese full of holes expired in the back of the fridge. So proud.
I thank government whip for the fine speech. Opposition whip, whenever you're ready, you may take the floor. Go ahead.
All right. Am I audible? No echoes?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Thank you. My speech will start on my first word. If I am a CEO of a company, I'm going to be paid 1,000 times more than my assistant, not because of economic disparity and not because the company doesn't care about my assistant, but because I am more valuable, I have more skills, I have more experience, and that is why I'm being paid more, and that is why I'm being valued more. 3 things then in my speech. First, I'll be going through a very extensive rebuttal on the previous speaker. Secondly, I'll be talking about the main clash of this debate. And then finally, what we needed to hear from side opposition or proposition that we failed to, and thus why we win the debate. First, though, on rebuttals. First, we think that the first rebuttal is on the point of resource allocation. Note that this resource allocation model, it's flawed on like 90 different levels, but still is brought up multiple times on the proposition bench. Why is it flawed then? One, we think that, just note that this makes no sense at all, that, oh, we now have resource allocation, and that's perfect. Note, okay, let's say you have $1 trillion now. Great job. Best players are still being paid the same amount as your worst players. Resource allocation makes no sense. Because if we wanted better resource allocation in the first place, then why would South Arabia sign a multi-billion-dollar contract with Cristiano Ronaldo? I'll tell you, it's because Cristiano Ronaldo is better than every single other player, and that he's worth every single penny. Or they should have just gotten 1 million average players. Good. Now we have resource allocation. We allocate our resources better. That is just not how this works. We don't think their model stands, and it's flawed on 90 different levels. I'll talk more about that later. Secondly, they talked about how sports is not really about money, and that it's come out about competitive field. It's not the main incentive. This is also extremely flawed, right? Because I think that money is important for all parts of life and in all industries is important, not just the sports sector, the financial sector, the education sector, every single sector, money is then important. The exact reason someone would probably choose to go into soccer professionally and sacrifice all these things in their lives is because they want to be, nice and reputable, but they also want the lifestyle that comes with, right? We think that there are a lot of people who like soccer, right? And those who become soccer players are then who want to become actual professional players. The exact reason of why these people sacrifice so much, and note that I'll talk about more about sacrifice later and why it's so important in this debate, right? They do concede to the harsh training and nature of these sports. These people train like every single day for like 15 hours. They sacrifice their own personal life, family, etc., in order to succeed. We don't think that they do it for, I'm a football player. I play for Manchester United. I get paid like $1 million. Same, I get paid as a janitor. This makes no sense at all. We don't understand why would they get why would they get into professional football in the first place or any professional sports league in the first place. Secondly, we think that they're any other alternative like sports branding, etc., doesn't work, because then we think that it still helps our argument on all the sports brand, and their main incentive is to find someone reputable and skillful, which means they're catered towards the best players. This is the exact same ideology and rhetoric as on our side of the house when we pay best players more money, except now the issue with this, and now they have to go to the sports brand. They have to play for the sports brand because they represent the sports brand. Note then that they're not playing for the club, they're not playing for a league, they're not actually in a team. They're only playing for the sports brand. There's no actual team thinking, because then it's not like, I play Manchester United. It's like I play for like Coca-Cola. This makes no sense. It just totally changes the ideology of what professional sports leagues actually is about, right? Which is supporting your own team, which supports your own local community. Right? Then note on the clashes then, which is firstly that which side better caters towards the players in general, and then on my second clash, which side better caters towards leagues in general. First thing on the first clash, which is which side better caters towards the players. We told you 90 different things. Here are a bunch of them. First thing we told you that is the interest of every single actor in this debate for the good players to be catered towards first. We've told you so many things. First, we told you that it's principally unjust for you to tell these people who have sacrificed their entire lives to get to where they are, to build this wealth that they thought they were entitled to provide and leave generational wealth to their children, right? Now you tell them that they're not entitled to these things, that the sacrifices they made to get to where they are the exact same sacrifices as like an average player who's not as good as them, but made less sacrifices. Note then the idea of sacrifice for meritocracy is then extremely mitigated, because you're like, I sacrificed so much, I'm getting paid the exact same as this guy who sacrificed less. There's no incentive for me to sacrifice even more. You stop them innovating and improving and pioneering into more higher quality sports, right? Then we think they're extremely angry at these clubs for doing this in the first place. We think it's unlikely that they're going to buy into any further action and further change to mitigate the harms that I'm gonna tell you now. We think that also, note why it's so absurd for the proposition to enter this debate telling you that people don't play for money, right? Because clubs themselves spend millions of dollars every single year to provide for the lifestyle of these players, right? They give mental health coaches for free, they have private gyms, they give exclusive clubs, etc., all for the benefit of the players, because that's why they play so well. Because they're modeled in an environment that's supposedly perfect. They wake up, right? And they have a nice family. They have a very nice house, right? They have resources at their disposal, right? They have all these things. They have protection, and they have a nice pillow to fall on. And they have good mental health. They're living a perfect life that allows them to play even better than the average person with a bunch of other issues would, right? So it's absurd to just assert that, they play just for competition, and also lifestyle is not that important. Lifestyle is the embodiment of a successful football career. If I'm a child and I see Ronaldo living a very nice lifestyle, and I also want to go play football, not just because I want to be a reputable football player, because I want to live the lifestyle that Ronaldo does. I want to provide for my family as Ronaldo does. I want to do all these things as they do. That is a very important incentive for these people to actually get into football in the first place. Losing this means, one, you have less buy-in to these clubs in the first place. Two, you have less higher quality sports leagues, because people are less likely to buy into this first place because of the money that you lose. What then did they tell you on this point, right? Proposition enters this debate telling you a few things, but one main thing that they help cater towards is that we can stop predatory contracts against some players. If they are a good player, then they deserve to get a good contract, right? Leagues will be fighting to give you an even better one than you are willing to get. They will be bidding for you to get you. If you aren't as good, right? Then you won't get a good contract. You'll get a predatory contract because you're just not as good, or you won't get any contract in the first place. That's just how the world works, right? We live in a meritocracy, not Proposition's own universe where average cuts it and we don't need anything else. That's not how it works. If you're not good enough, you don't deserve to take the spot, take away money from someone who's better than you. Note, even if we buy this argument on how we help predatory contract in the first place, the only thing you help is the worst players who get into high leagues, which is one, bad for their own career because they'll always be worse than everyone else out there, right? But then on top of that, you fill these high leagues with average players who don't deserve to play at all. Note that we're not like discriminatory against like bad players. We actually help them, right? But because they can play against people, right? They can actually play against people in the smaller leagues that are at that level. But at the end of the day, football and every single other professional sporting games on this planet is about showing the world what the best that humanity can deliver, not what the average is what humanity can deliver. For those reasons, vote opposition. Thank you. Wait, what? How long is the speech then? Is it 8 minutes? Oh. I think it was. That was like 7:15. I was like, 30 seconds over.
I think opposition will for the final speech. Position reply whenever you're ready to take a
Hi, can I just double check? Can you turn your audio off? Can I just double check them both audible and visible?
Yes, sure.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, I'm gonna start on my first word. We think the issue with Proposition is that they don't realize that sport leagues, specifically professional sport leagues, have funding behind them, right? We tell you that because they're professional, they actually have like a financial plan. We think that it's very unrealistic for Proposition just to assert that a soccer player is going to pay their soccer players like, I don't know, like $500 million, because they actually do realize that if they do not have enough resources, then they're not going to put that much money into their players, right? A few things I'll be doing in my speech today. Number one, on a few callouts and the fundamental mistakes that Proposition makes on their case. Number two, on the positive material that we've brought you, why it's debate winning, and lastly, on the best case versus worst case if I have time. Number one, on callouts, we've already told you the Proposition does not realize that if paying a soccer player $500 million is truly bad, then it would make their league unsustainable in the long run. And so essentially, these leagues will not be stupid enough to do that. These companies do it because they realize that youth investment will be worse, right? But companies then realize that youth investment is better for their company, and they will do that. If there's a gap in their resources, then they will do that instead of investing the immense money into one single player, right? Their main push on is the argument of resources. We tell you, number one, that there will be no resource allocations if people don't watch sports, if there is no funding going into this game, if there's no funding going into this entire industry, right? Number two, they never actually prove why companies won't just lower the salaries. It's such a bad thing for them to be paying, I don't know, like Messi 400 million annually. We tell you that if these companies don't have the ability to pay this 400 million, they simply won't, right? But they can right now. They do this because these clubs are built on the proper principle that if you contribute more to the league, then I as a league will pay you more because I want you to stay in my league and I want you to help bring fame to the league, right? It's very simple because you still want to respect the player to keep them. We tell you, Judge, you cannot credit them for these arguments being their biggest push because they never actually provided to us any mechanization as to why full professional sport leagues are likely to be stupid when they're financials, when they actually have like financial people behind them, right? Number two, Proposition's attempt at taking our core argument down on how sports is not about the money behind them. For example, the Olympics. We tell you that, like, number one, one, people in the Olympics are paid huge amounts of money, right? They go simply for this monetary benefit. Number two, if it's not about training, then why, if it's not about the money, then why do people sacrifice themselves, spend 16 hours a day training, right? We tell you can't credit this argument because this response to actual BS, hence our arguments still stand. We tell you that, of course, everything is about money because people do enjoy sports, right? Like we have like Mark, like he plays sports every day, but he's not going like, but then the only reason why like these people who are playing in professional sport leagues is essentially for this like financial incentive, right? Now they also try to say that sports players are not in it for the money, how they're still incented to work hard on their side of the house. We think that's about money for a lot of the industries, right? The exact reason why someone probably chooses soccer for a profession is because they want to make this money out of it. There are a lot of people who like soccer, those who become players out of it, but they don't those who become players are those who want to become players out of it for the money, right? This is the exact reason why people sacrifice themselves and do concede to the harsh training nature of sports. Now, number three, we tell you that exploitation is 10 times worse on their side of the house because our first argument is on the free market principle, right? We tell you that it's unfair to pay different people the same price for the different amount of time and the sacrifices that they make. And so this is literally the definition of exploitation, where you pay people less than what they are worth. We think that you can't credit them for this argument because we literally bring in this principle as to how this proves how their exploitation is much, much more severe on their side of the house. Now, lastly, they tell you about investment and stability. Let's take prop at their best and assume that our side is somehow more unfair, right? Number one, we tell you that it doesn't make sense, but even if it does, people watch sports because of the unpredictability. People want competition. They don't want to have stability, and know that people who invest in sports are not looking for stability, that they're looking to gamble, right? This is the nature of sports. It's the competition in the nature of sports is to go against the best of the best and feel accomplished when you can win. So they quite literally concede this in their Olympic example when we tell you that if you take this example, assume that people go to and compete and not for money, they go there to compete against the best of the best. So sports is based on someone going against a sports super god. And so even if we take them and say that our side is somehow biased, which we've already proved inherently isn't, we tell you that their ideal road, propagation, changes the whole livelihood of sports, which is competition. And so if anything, we create more incentive for investments again. And so please side with proposition.
I think opposition will prepare for the final speech, which I put down the last speaker of the House, for the time when I was ready to take the floor. Okay.
Can I confirm I'm clearly audible and visible?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Okay. If opposition wants to defend CEOs getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars while bottom-level workers grovel at their feet for a single cent more per hour, then opposition is fighting an uphill battle. Much like this analogy, despite OpWhip's apparent aggression, the reality is clear. Many athletes, forgotten and not in the public spotlight, are forced to survive on dangerously low salaries with horrible safety infrastructure. They are taken advantage of, they are exploited, it is wrong, it is bad. So, three important and very reasonable characterizations and clarifications before the main clash. Number one, we will protect the safety and livelihoods of our players, whether that be in the form of external investment into things like insurance or just by paying them an adequate salary. PM frames this to you. I from DPM extend this further by giving you hard justification on the incentives of leagues who, surprise, surprise, don't want their players to get hurt. Second piece on clarity. Sports players aren't quitting after our policy. Throughout this debate, we give you two independent reasons why not. Number one, this is not in their incentive to do so. Most sports players love sports. They give up their salary to buy kids balls if they don't have it, and they compete in lower level leagues for years without getting adequate salaries. They care more about sport than they care about money. But secondly, Even if we were to say that all sports players are entirely money hungry, we cater to their money hungry incentive in our world anyway for two reasons. One, because you want to climb up the ladder to better leagues that pay more, and B, because there are knock-on financial benefits like Cristiano Ronaldo getting paid millions of dollars to appear in ads. But the end conclusion and the more important conclusion is that money is secondary, especially when you're getting paid enough already. If we cared about money the most, then these players wouldn't have become players, they would have become doctors. Third piece on clarity. Sports leagues won't die in our world. People are fans of sporting. People, at least most people, aren't going to stop watching sports just because competitiveness may or may not go down. Furthermore, PM's second argument gives you various reasons why competition and competitiveness is likely to be better in our world to no response from opposition. And opposition whip and the entirety of opposition bench has to prove the fact that sporting will absolutely disappear in our world, and otherwise they cannot claim our benefits in any way. They don't fulfill this burden, this goes out the window. With that said then, on clashes, what's most important in this debate? As we've said, athletes are the most important and their protection is the most important. Leagues can survive, these corporations can survive, but athletes cannot. They have untransferable skills, they're the most vulnerable actor, we protect them. Two reasons we win on athletes then. Number one, we are better for the youth development, the youth who are unable to access higher leagues and therefore who don't get paid enough, who aren't earning livelihoods. We give you three reasons why. One, from our first argument, which proves that resource allocation occurs to youth development, there is no response here. Second, an increased direct investment into the youth, which was our second argument on things like ideas like stability, which opposition completely misunderstands. But third, and most importantly, an increased transparency and athlete protection, which was my extending argument from second speaker, which tells you that a lot of people get taken advantage of and we would rather protect them than not. And opposition whip's insane idea that in capitalism, people who aren't talented enough deserve to be exploited is completely fucked up. We are not willing to take this trade-off. The second reason we win on athletes is on the safety for all athletes, that we would rather that we allocate more money to these people. Opposition's line of response is to say that we would have done this earlier. The reason this hasn't happened because money hungry and corporations who just want to win get a better return on investment by buying a new player than they get from building a new stadium. It is too long-term, it is too arbitrary, they don't do it. That's why it's not happening in their world. We force them to do it in our world. So at the end of the day, to be honest, we don't give a shit if Premier Leagues loses money, nor do we care if Cristiano Ronaldo becomes an average earner. We don't care if top level sports players quit. We don't care if sports gets a bit more boring. What we care about is protecting the athletes who are the most vulnerable, not Cristiano Ronaldo, but the name you don't know. Those are the people we cater to. Propose.
I think go back for the final speech. We thank everyone for the wonderful debate. You may all shake hands, close officially. The results will be announced in the main hall. The vice can leave the room shortly at the